So somebody is accusing you of potentially ending the world. I can confidently tell you, as someone whose job it is to write headlines and edit stories, that Alberta's oil business has a serious perception problem. Now, you're not alone. The entire energy sector does. I mean, how many people here are in the energy sector? A show of hands. And how many of the rest of you who aren't raising your hands have a business that interacts with the energy sector? So you're all in the energy sector. And I must say that your colleagues at BP, they did you no favors. I mean, they weren't the first company to have an environmental disaster. I mean, probably a lot of you firsthand saw Exxon Valdez up in Alaska. But in terms of backlash, this one felt worse. It felt worse because of two simple words: beyond petroleum. Over the preceding decade, BP, as you all know, spent billions of dollars branding itself as an environmentally friendly company, complete with, Beyond Petroleum slogan and the green logo with all the leaves. So when their response to Deepwater Horizon was seen as lackluster and their lousy safety track record and tepid environmental policy didn't hold up to public scrutiny, these superficial efforts at corporate responsibility were seen as nothing more than a propaganda campaign. It was the ultimate example of greenwashing. Thus was the DP brand thoroughly trashed, in part because of their own advertising dollars. So let's talk about real corporate social responsibility. Now, in 1970, Milton Friedman, he was basically channeling, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. He famously declared that the only social responsibility that companies had was to increase profits. That was the only responsibility. And some still hold on to that theory. But as the world has become more interconnected, that worldview has generally faded in favor of what Harvard's Michael Porter termed shared value, that capitalism has evolved, and that maximizing profits now derives from doing the right thing for shareholders, for employees, and the public alike. And that argument now carries the day. And that's especially true in the energy business. I mean, you guys aren't producing toys, and you're not producing candy or underwear. These are products that people can buy or not buy. But, you're not independent actors. You're inherently social companies. I mean, when your industry performs well, the entire world benefits. Energy innovation allows for all the modern advances that comforts humans and provides the things we crave. Energy innovation, as you know, also drives our economy. When energy innovation drives down costs, the economy surges. And when costs go up, the economy swoons. The energy sector employs hundreds of thousands of people, and you have some of the most valuable companies in the world. But all this public good comes with public trade-offs, from pollution to international politics. And when a catastrophe happens, whether it's Exxon Valdez or the Kalamazoo River or Deepwater Horizon, millions of people can be affected. So by getting into this business, whether you all like it or not, you're public actors, and you're playing at the highest stakes table with the greatest rewards and the biggest risks. So it's not really a practical question about whether an energy company should engage in corporate social responsibility. It's how. And as BP shows, how makes all the difference in the world. First, stepping back a bit, boiled down, what is CSR? What is corporate responsibility? There are three types, really. The first kind is basically risk management. Let's do everything we can to make sure our pipeline doesn't leak, that our mine doesn't contaminate the drinking water. These are the right things to do, and when this philosophy is applied uniformly, the overall ROI is there too. The second kind basically entails being a good corporate citizen. More energy efficiency, better environmentalism, worker flexibility, fewer partnerships with unsavory characters and unstable places. Again, the consensus seems to be that there's ROI here, both in terms of dollars and cents and morally. Cultivating dictatorships is bad for all involved, as Shell learned in Nigeria, as Exxon is discovering in Indonesia. It's actually one of the great advantages you all have in Alberta. So those two acts of CSR, they're well and good, and they both bode well for Alberta. But I want to focus on the third kind, and that's corporate philanthropy. Now, for the past century or so, it's gone by another name. It's really known as marketing. The tried and true formula goes like this. You give money when asked for a local or industry cause, whether you're buying a table or giving a corporate sponsorship, and you get your company's name displayed prominently somewhere, and everyone thanks you, and everyone thinks, hey, what a generous company that company is. But as with the larger question of marketing itself, the ROI equation is trickier. The other two types of CSR structurally affect how companies operate in ways that are proven to be financially beneficial over the long run. But does simply giving away money that otherwise could pad the bottom line, does that achieve the same effect? Now, when pursued on a small scale, I don't think that makes much difference. Now, when I was up in Fort McMurray, I got a tour of that. I don't know how many people have been to Fort McMurray. Oh, my brother's here. There's you've been to that community center there. It's like the Taj Mahal. I mean, we don't have anything like that in New York. I mean, the giant Olympic swimming pools and 23 hockey rinks, and I'm surprised there's not a covered golf course. It's $120 million, they told me, and they're doing a $180 million expansion. I mean, for a town less than 100,000 people, I mean, it's just mind-bending. And the local oil companies are, they've done their part to some degree. They, largely it seems they're, writing checks for like $100,000 a year for the naming rights to some swim program or another. But at the end of the day, that's just making your employees feel a little bit better and a little prouder about where they work, and it's making this remote city more attractive for the workers you want to attract. You could sponsor all the junior hockey teams and cancer walks in Alberta. It doesn't really change the game in terms of the oil sands being viewed through the lens of, the little town that might destroy the world. So, I was watching, last year, especially in New York, when we saw the Occupy Wall Street movement spring up. And, it was curious because, I don't take the movement seriously in that, there's no leadership. There's nobody who's leading it per se. And they've never issued a platform about what they want. And even if they did, I don't suspect I'd agree with hardly any of it. But I do think it's important to understand the mood that they exemplify, that people or corporations are getting richer and richer without making the world a better place. And that, to me, is the constant, that's the constant thread throughout this. I mean, these same protesters who are sitting up there with their 1% placards decrying billionaires, they also, turned on their $199 iPhones and made a little kind of digital candle on it when Steve Jobs died, a guy worth $11 billion. I mean, I think the underlying sentiment out there in the public, they don't hate success. They don't hate success when it's achieved with larger societal benefits. And that's where the corporate philanthropy opportunity lies. And for the past year, as I mentioned, we've witnessed the power of that opportunity at Forbes. We can talk. It's probably worth talking about Buffett and Gates for a moment, and specifically what philanthropy did to them as brands and as people. I mean, before philanthropy, Warren Buffett was, he was a genius asset allocator, and Bill Gates was a tech visionary, and a fairly cutthroat competitor. Who Europe kept on crying was an antitrust violator. But then they came up with something called the Giving Pledge, which asked billionaires to commit to give away 50% of their net worth either during their life or at death. And so far, over the last 2 years, 92 people have taken the Giving Pledge. 92 billionaires have said, we're going to give away our money. But more important, though, is how, and then that pledge to give it away is how they're giving it away. They're not just writing a big check to the Red Cross or the United Nations. They're using the exact same skills that made them those giant fortunes, and they're applying them to solve global problems. I mean, think about Buffett for a second. Buffett, he's worth $46 billion. He's pledged all his Berkshire Hathaway stock, so that's 99% of his net worth. It's all going to charity either before or at his death. And it's all got to be spent. He's all mandated. It all has to be spent within 10 years of his death. So think about that in huge amount of money being, because he doesn't want to just have a giant, like a giant endowment so that his name is being passed on for centuries. I mean, he could fund the biggest endowment in the world. He doesn't want to do that. He could build a giant building in his honor. He doesn't want to do that. He makes jokes to me. He's like, I could build a giant pyramid of gold. I mean, what does that do for me? So he wants it spent. He wants it spent fast so he can solve problems now. And I think that's a very Buffett-like way of thinking things. He's being very practical. There's no ego there. There's so little ego that he gave all the money. He's giving all the money to Bill and Melinda Gates. He's like, you guys, I like the way you do it, so why don't you give away my money too? And so they're sitting on just an amazing opportunity to do something. And Bill Gates, I mean, if you look what he's been doing with Melinda, they're looking at Africa, and why do 1 million people die in Africa of malaria when nobody in the U.S. or Canada dies of malaria? It's because they can't afford the vaccines and there's no market for vaccines. So rather than just write a big check for $1 billion and buy, 100 million doses of vaccine. That doesn't solve the problem. You just have the problem again 2 years from now after you vaccinate everybody, and you got new kids who are born who are succumb to malaria. So what he did is he's creating a market. He's actually putting money in the companies, and he's putting money. He's subsidizing vaccine companies. So he's actually creating a market so there's enough cash in there for them to try to start developing low-cost vaccines that'll bring the cost down. And so he's actually come up with a long-term solution. I really do think he will eradicate malaria deaths in his lifetime, actually a lot sooner than that. I mean, so if you think about it on a reputational level, philanthropy has made them saints. And on a professional level, they both tell me that's the most rewarding and transformative thing they've ever done. But what's more interesting in some ways at the event was how many of these incredibly successful people share lessons about transformative corporate philanthropy. For this audience, I think what Mark Benioff did was more fundamental. Now, Benioff, of course, is the founder and CEO of Salesforce.com. And he practices the usual tenets of CSR. Any qualified charity can use Salesforce's amazing suite of services for free. And that's good corporate citizenship. And it's also good business, because he continues to make kind of his platform and his cloud offerings the global standard. But when he incorporated the company, from day one, he also built corporate philanthropy into the company's ethos. From the very beginning, he pledged 1% of all company's profits to charity, thus aligning his success with the greater good. More noteworthy, he gave nonprofits a 1% equity stake. So charities weren't just beneficiaries, they were literal partners. And finally, he asked that his employees buy in, and he gave them the time flexibility. And Dean mentioned some similar initiatives. He gave them the time flexibility to do so, mandating that 1% of their work time be devoted on behalf of charity. And this last component is essential. I mean, Forbes, we have a very talented research division. And last year, we conducted a huge survey of top corporate HR managers. 59% of them said the numero uno, optimum way to boost skill levels was through corporate philanthropy initiatives. The idea was that they would take new initiatives, they would take new leadership roles, and they would apply their talents in kind of related areas, but new areas. 93% bought into the idea that creating social value translated into economic value. And virtually all of them bought into the idea that by getting their employees involved in corporate philanthropy, not just slapping their name on a charity event, but actively involving their team in the mission, created a happier, more dedicated workforce. And in a place like Alberta, where everywhere I go, they keep on asking me, will you move here because we have a job for you? I think that's very important. And this phenomenon is only going to increase. I mean, just look at your labor pool and who's entering it. I mean, for the millennial generation, this is a huge deal. Study after study proves that this group is not purely motivated by salary and benefits. A recent survey of this age group revealed that 79% of them care deeply about working for a company that makes the world a better place. There's tremendous wealth being generated, in the Alberta energy sector. I've been seeing it for the past 3 days. I mean, it's enough for you guys to be thinking really big. I mean, what if every company, in Alberta said, we're going to earmark a specific transparent percentage of our profits towards some kind of environmental effort, and we're going to publicly track how those results and how that's the money being deployed. So while we're providing energy that the world needs right now, we're also helping make the world, a greener place long term. What if rather than just brag about how many jobs this industry creates and how well-paying they are, every major company doing business here pledged to come together and give a college scholarship to every student in Alberta who, achieved some kind of threshold, as long as they came back to Alberta and put those skills to use. You could expand that across all of Canada. What if the entire Alberta energy sector decided to adopt Canada's national parks, make them the best in the world, and dispatch all their employees to help with this effort? Then maybe Fort McMurray would be known as a town that saved the world. And more than just being known for it, maybe it would actually do it. I want to thank you again, everybody, for taking the time and coming here. And it's been a treat to be here in Alberta.